Hey, what's up guys? My name is Greg Lester and this is Game Audio Analysis, and today I'll be recreating the iconic energy sword from Halo using only a can of Coke. In sound design, it's often important to have an idea what kind of sound you want to achieve before starting. I took some time to watch the animation on repeat, trying to break it down into different parts and figure out how each part should sound. Then I split the sound into layers, each of which has a unique task. These layers are the ignition layer, which is the initial sound as a weapon fires up, the energy layer, which represents the movement and texture of the blade, the electricity layer, which is made up of high-end fizzing and sparkling sounds to add some additional texture to the effect and help emphasize the feeling of using a powerful high-energy weapon. And finally, a bass layer to add some weight and impact to the sound. With that in mind, I then pressed record and enjoyed my drink. I listened back to the source material I'd recorded and picked out samples that I felt had the right movement and tonal characteristics. Then I started processing the samples I'd chosen. This consisted of a lot of experimentation with a big culling of unnecessary sounds at the end. I tend to cut around a third of the sounds from a project like this. These are sounds that don't add enough value to the final result and would only make the effect sound muddy if left in. Remember, less is more, and the fewer sounds you have, the more clarity you will be able to achieve in your mix. The first layer is the ignition layer, which provides the main auditory feedback of the weapon being activated. It consists of 3 sounds that I time stretched and pitch modulated to create a feeling of upward movement in the sound as the weapon starts up. Next, I added some multi-band compression to one of the samples, some fuzz distortion to the second, and a very short modulated delay with high feedback to the third sound, which gives the overall layer a nice tail. The energy layer is made up of sounds of the can tearing that I once again modulated the pitch of to mimic the movement of the blade. I then added some chorus to widen the stereo image and a phaser with a high rate to create a watery sounding texture that I think conveys the shimmering nature of the blade. Next, I added a frequency shifting delay, which sounds like this. This adds some counter movement to the sound and moves it slightly away from the listener to create the illusion of the sound being within the game space. Lastly, I cleaned up and enhanced the sound with EQ to remove unwanted frequencies and upward compression to help amplify some of the smaller details in the sound. The electricity layer helps to convey the release of the stored energy as the blade extends. For this layer, I used the sounds of a can being opened and scratched to create a layer that sounded harsh and abrasive, helping make the sword sound dangerous. The samples were time stretched to fit the movement of the weapon, and then I applied a few more processes individually. I pitched down the formants of the first sample to make it sound deeper, added a chorus to make it wider and add a sci-fi vibe, and then a tube compressor to emphasize the details in the sound, and an EQ to remove unnecessary low frequencies. The second sample was processed with fuzz distortion, followed by 2 different delays with modulating pitch and feedback to widen the sound and pitch up the tail. Lastly, I pitched up the entire sample, added a tiny bit of reverb, and removed the low end with an EQ, before combining it with the first sample to create the finished layer. Our last layer is the bass layer, and we're slightly cheating on this one. In order to have a clean and consistent sub-bass, I utilized a plugin called Enforcer, which detects the transient of the sound and plays a low frequency sample alongside it. This is what the effect sounds like without Enforcer. And this is what it sounds like with. You could get a similar result using a sub-bass or pitching a sample way down, but in this case, Enforcer just helps to simplify the process. The final step of the process is mastering the sound to bring all the individual layers together. I kept the processing fairly light, adding a touch of multiband compression and a gated reverb, which helps put the sound in the game space. More important than any further compression, however, is the use of EQ to achieve a clean mix. I placed an EQ on each layer before the master bus, removing unnecessary frequencies and subtly highlighting the ones that gave each layer its own character. Cleaning up the individual layers in this manner ensures that the sound doesn't become muddy when all of the layers play at the same time. And now, the final result. I think it turned out pretty well. Creating a sound with limited source material is a really fun challenge and can create some unique and interesting results. I really encourage you to try it for yourself and see what you can come up with. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see a full in-depth breakdown of how I created this sound, then please head over to my Patreon, where you can also access 2 of my own sample libraries for use in your own projects. If you enjoyed this video, then hit the subscribe button and share the video with your fellow game audio enthusiasts. I also want to give a massive thank you to my patrons for supporting me. Cheers guys, and see you next episode.